Let's talk about the contour tool. The contour tool is a series of sections through an object. And so what I'm going to do now is just click on my object and immediately turn it into a series of sections. Now let's take a look at the tool options palette. You can see right now the increment is set at 2 feet. And when we use this tool, we're in the object buffer immediately, and these are all manipulatable. So I can go ahead and change these numbers to something like 4 feet and hit the tab key, and we can see that updates in real time. Let's go back to 2 feet, hit the tab key. You'll also notice that we get the transform tools here, so we can rotate the angle of those in multiple directions. Kind of like the section tool on steroids, because it's actually slicing our object all the way through at whatever increment we tell it. Another option here is that it allows us to change it to just the number of increments. Let's go ahead and just go back to our original object and invoke the contour tool again to reset it back to the baseline. And one of the nice things about something like this is instead of going at a 2-foot increment, I could go at a certain division of increments. So I can say I want 10 divisions within my object, or I want 5 divisions within my object, not really knowing maybe the scale of that object to get however many pieces I want it. That's a really useful tool. And we can also move our contour start point around. So wherever we move that transform widget, you'll notice that we get a plane right at the origin of that. So if I move that vertically, we always get a plane wherever we place that origin. Clicking on that one more time, you'll also notice that the orientation of the contours is always dependent on the reference plane. So I'm getting contours along the XY axis right now. Let's go ahead and undo that. And let's shift the reference plane to another orientation just to see what happens when we click on that contour tool. You'll see it now slices it, again, in context to the reference plane itself. So wherever that reference plane is where it's going to begin the contour cutting. And of course, you can modify it to be whatever angle you want, not a problem. But understanding where the reference plane is a key to getting the results you expect out of this tool without having to mess around with the transform widget. Let's take a look at a slightly more complex piece of geometry to really show off what the contour tool can do. And again, coming at this from an architectural angle, this is really where the contour tool might make a lot of sense, because here's a simple topography model of a site. What I'm going to do is click on the contour tool, and again, just keeping the increment at the basic 2 foot, you can see it slices that object up into topographic contours. And I want to take this moment to show off some of the other options over here in our tool options palette. And one that I think is particularly useful is to go ahead and to change the layout. Instead of leaving the contours at the elevation that that little widget is sitting at, what I'm going to do is change the layout to this third option where I can set on the base plane. And we can see now that it actually lays those all out next to each other, which could then be useful to send to a laser cutter, for example. I could cut those out of a thin material, stack them all on top of each other, and build a physical model of this site plan. So this can be a really useful option when you want to lay these out onto a CNC machine or a laser cutter, or if you wanted to print them out on paper and then use those as templates for cutting physical models and putting these back together. It's a really great tool to understand. And the last option that we're going to explore here is the second option in the tool options, which is on base plane on top of each other. And that can be extremely useful for a 2-dimensional version of this 3D model. I'm going to click on the Fit All button. We can see that what it has done is just flattened all those right on top of each other and created a 2-dimensional surface. It's actually a series of objects that are all stacked directly on top of each other to create this topographic map of our objects instead. So potentially useful, again, in the architectural realm and others. I'm sure that you can find a great use for this tool. Let's do a short exercise and combine some of the tools that we've been looking at here so far. Let's combine contours to create a topo map, but only to the top surface of this object. If I go into the inspector under the info tab, we can see that this is a solid object. I'm just going to leave the inspector open here as we work through this so that we can refer to it a few times. I'm going to now deselect my object, and I'm going to unstitch the top face of the object here. So we just separate that away. And if I deselect and just click on the top face, we can see we have a surface. And if I click on the base, we also see that we have a surface. So if I were to grab this top surface and move it away, we can see we have this hollow object. Let's undo that. So I'm going to click on the contour tool and look at my tool options just to make sure that these are exactly what I want. I'm going to leave my contours at elevation, but I'm going to check the box to group them together so that I can then place them on a separate layer easily after the fact. Right now my reference plane is invisible. Can't really see it because it's underneath this object. It's down there. But remember, contours are going to happen parallel to the reference plane. Before I run the contour tool, I want to select my surface and I'm going to copy it to my clipboard. So edit, copy, or you can do Control or Command C depending on which platform you're on. And I just want to do that because as soon as I get my contours with the contour tool, that surface goes away, right? So if I click on this to generate my contours, you'll see that my smooth surface goes away. Now what I'm going to do is select my contours with an area selection, dragging a window around those. I'm going to create a new layer, and let's go ahead and call that contours. And what I'm going to do now is go into the attributes tab for that selection, and I'm going to set the layer to contours. So that places it onto that layer. And now I have the ability to turn that on or off independently of what's on layer 1. So let's go ahead and rename layer 1 to topo base. And now we can see that that's reflected in the layers palette. And the next step is to simply paste my smooth surface right back into the file. So we can see now that I have an actual contour model with the elevation contours, which can be really helpful for visualizing where the objects that sit on this contour land in regards to height above the base of the model. This is a great way to kind of read graphically where things are. Now to stitch the top surface back onto the base, I'm going to click on the stitch tool. I'm going to click on my top surface and then my base here. Stitches all of that back into a single object. And again, let's check it. We'll click on that object and we can go to the Info tab in the inspector and see that it is once again a solid object. So the whole reason that we unstitched it and then restitched it in is when it's unstitched, we can apply the contour tool just to the top face versus applying it and getting all of the outlines around the solid base as well. And it's a simple task just to unstitch and then stitch it back together once we're done. And while we're in there, we see that there are a few places where, because these are closed loops in our contour lines, it has drawn those as surfaces. So I'm going to simply uncheck the box in the Attributes tab here where it says Render as a Shaded Surface, because I only want those to show up as line work. And by doing that, you can see that it hides those surfaces from view and we purely get the contour lines. So this is a much cleaner way to look at our model. If I jump over to the shaded full mode and click on that, we can see that those ISO lines from our underlying mesh go away and we just see the contour lines sitting on top of our smooth surface. So hopefully this is a good example of why you want to use a combination of these tools in a specific workflow to achieve the look that you're going for with a topographic model. Now let's take this one step further and cut a road into this contour model. I have a layer over here with a two-dimensional surface that is very basic. It's just a two-dimensional outline, and if I go into the inspector and turn on the controls for this object, you can see that it is a parametric two-dimensional road object, and I could manipulate it because it's still parametric. What I want to do is I want to cut it into the base of the topography model. So I'm going to use the slice tool because this is a solid and this is a two-dimensional object. So clicking on the slice tool, we're going to click on the object that we want to be sliced, which is our contour base model. And then we're going to click on the object that we want to do the slicing. And you can see that that projects it right down onto our model. It actually cuts it into 3 separate parts, all of which are solid. So if I click on the first one, go to the Info tab, it's a solid. If I click on the second one, it's also a solid. Click on the third one, it's also a solid. Now what I can do is I could use my paint bucket tool with a different color, and I could paint that road to be a different material, for instance. Now, what if I don't want the road sides to come down the sides of the base of the model? I only wanted that slice to affect the top. Well, we've already gone through that process, but let's go ahead and do it again. I'm going to undo that slice command. I'm going to unstitch the top face of the object so that it is an independent, isolated object. I am then going to run the slice command just on the top face, and then use my road object as a cutting surface. And again, this is projecting perpendicular to the active reference plane. We can see here in the lower corner that we have the XY plane active. And if I wanted to paint that object a separate color, I can. Then I can turn my cutting layer back off so that it's invisible, and this cleans up nicely. Now, the only downside to this is I can't stitch all this back together if I want to maintain a different material on my road surface. So if you're willing to live with multiple objects and surfaces instead of solids, this is a good technique. Otherwise, you could possibly thicken that road so that it sits above the topographic surface, delete these two side surfaces, and paste back in that top surface one more time so that it's continuously running underneath the road, and then stitch that back to the side. So there's lots of ways to solve this problem, and these tools give you lots of options. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to get notified when new videos are released on this channel, click the subscribe button below and click the notification bell icon to get a notification when new videos are released. See you in the next one.